before Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, I was there. I was waiting in line at a gas station in my car, and the line wrapped around the street with no end in sight, but at least my gas station had an usher. And as I waited, my mom calls. She knows that this is going to be a catastrophic storm, but I did what daughters do, maybe what you would do. I say, Mom, I've got this, I'm ready, we're going to be fine. And she did what moms do, particularly Puerto Rican moms. Instead of telling me how afraid she was, she said, Cristina, why in the world are you in Puerto Rico wasting your time and your education when you could be anywhere else in the world and you work so hard to leave this place? And her words felt like knives, and I quietly hung up the phone, tears running down my face as I inched my way closer to the pump. And I wish I had known how right she was to be afraid, but we didn't know what was coming. And in the back of my head, I was wondering, why had I come back after I left when I was 18? Puerto Rico had stopped being a place for opportunity for me. After 120 years of colonial status to the US, Puerto Rico was far from an enchanted island. I didn't get to see the beauty that tourists get to see. I just felt bitterness. Bitterness towards the corrupt government, bitterness towards the elite families that seemed perfectly comfortable in the extreme inequality, bitterness towards the fact that the beaches were full of trash and the public spaces and historical spaces were constantly defaced and poorly maintained. And that bitterness, that disdain, became a mantra that everyone around me was echoing. Puerto Ricans are lazy, we're corrupt, nothing good can happen here. So you can imagine why I left, the way many Puerto Ricans have left, feeling almost like a self-loathing and a deep inferiority to the Western world's superiority. But I was determined to prove my worth, and I wanted to make a difference because I felt so trapped. So I pursued an Ivy League education. I was ruthless about my thirst for understanding power because I felt on the powerless side. I became a TV show host and a grant maker, and then a professor. And when I finally found my calling in education, something strange happened. I started feeling debilitating pain on my right shoulder blade. And I went to physical therapists until one of them told me, listen, that pain that you're feeling, it's associated with feeling like you lack community. And that hit me. I didn't feel like I had community. And that pain was calling me back home. But back home where and why? My family had left Puerto Rico already. And if you didn't belong to a wealthy family, why go back anyway? There was nothing there for me. But the calling was stronger. And I moved back to Puerto Rico 9 months before the hurricane was announced. And this is why I found myself waiting in line at the gas station 2 days before the hurricane made landfall. The storm was going to enter exactly where my partner's house was located, on the southeast corner of the island, in a mountaintop town called Mariana. My partner said, even if it's the worst here, listen, we got community, people know how to take care of each other, they know how to find food. And I grew up on the south side of the island, in the second largest city of Ponce. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I couldn't even imagine it, but I trusted him. On September 19th, 2017, at 11 p.m., we were awakened to the sound of exploding glass. And until that moment, I had only heard that sound in horror movies and thrillers, like most people, but this was real. So water was gushing in, and the glass and the leaves and everything. So we went to our safe room, which was a tiny bathroom. 3 adults, a dog, and a cat, and we locked ourselves in, water coming in from underneath the door, and we waited for hours, endless. And when we emerged, we could not believe our eyes. Everything was gone. It looked like a bomb had exploded, and we were disoriented and displaced. But then people started coming out from inside their homes. During those days, if you were stuck on an obstructed road, everyone that was in their cars would come out almost as if pre-rehearsed, machetes in hand, and they together would chop down the trees and open up the roads because they knew what to do. And on day 4, after the hurricane, we decided that we were going to open up a community kitchen. We didn't have food, water, or a kitchen, but we were determined. So we heard somewhere that, maybe in the north part of the island, there was going to be some reception. So we said, all right, we're going to go up there. And we wanted to tell everyone what we were going to do through Facebook. In 5 days, we launched Proyecto de Apoyo Mutuo, which translates to Mutual Aid Project. And by day 10, we were feeding 300 people every day, Monday to Friday, out of a completely self-run operation. And listen, we weren't able to do this if it hadn't been for community. So we actually reached out to the association that was based in Mariana, that has been working in Mariana for 36 years, ARECMA. ARECMA had the space. They had the kitchen, they had a big space for a festival that they had been building for 32 years. And we asked them, can we use the space? And they said yes. And then we went to talk to the cooks, and we said, will you cook for the people here? And then we talked to the artists, and we said, will you paint the signs? And we called our friends, and we asked them, will you help us clean? And they said yes, with the little that they had, because they knew we had to do something. And Proyecto de Apoyo Mutuo Mariana was born. The space was full of solidarity and beauty and reciprocity. So the word started spreading. During those days, it was the people in front of us that were the ones that were so important. Donations started coming in, but then the people on the ground, they would bring whatever food they had that they couldn't cook because they didn't have gas stoves. They would bring in whatever tools they had, whatever skills they could contribute, and whatever cash they had in exchange for a meal. And the word started spreading. So pretty soon, we had people from the region arriving. We then started receiving paramedics, nurses, and doctors and aid. So we had to create an entire distribution system and surveys in order to identify the needs of the people and distribute and deliver things according to what they needed, where they needed it. And it was through this process of doing that we were able to move from a place of despair to beginning to heal. The way it would work is that the kids would arrive at 9:30 in the morning, they would set up the tables and chairs, and then they would start playing chess. And pretty soon, hundreds of people would arrive, and then we would deliver food to about 60 people across the mountain in the community. And then everyone around us was asking, wanting to join, and we asked them, how contribute whatever you know how to do. What do you love to do? Come and join us. And there was this one young man who approached us, and he said, you're just regular people. What do you mean you're helping? You're actually doing that? And we said, yeah, come join us. And so he did. And this young man changed his life. He later told us that his father had said that people didn't really help anymore, not without an agenda. And then he started seeing what we were doing, and he decided to not leave Puerto Rico and join the military, and instead he stayed and he studied on the island because he started to see that a different Puerto Rico was possible. And this is when we took a step back and looked at our work. And we realized we are building a different Puerto Rico. We're building it because, you see, when the entire physical and material infrastructure collapsed, the only thing that remained was the invisible, life-saving infrastructure, which is our knowledge of where we are in relation to each other, our knowledge of each other's skills, our capacity to work with our neighbor and sometimes forgive our neighbor and mobilize. Because when disasters happen, the person right in front of you is your best chance at survival. And this is when we understood that the times we will be facing as humanity will require us to recognize that community is the most important thing around us. Because when there's no ATMs, no communication systems, no food, no water, nothing, you need to be able to tap into a pre-existing system of respect, of trust, of reciprocity. And from there, you can rebuild. In Mariana, we knew that we needed communication systems, we needed solar power, we needed water systems. We spent 6 months without running water, 9 months without electricity. So when we put out the call for communication systems, a donor answered, and she funded a group of former US Coast Guarders who responded to Sandy, and within 24 hours, they came to Mariana and they installed Wi-Fi using solar-powered radios. So we looked around and we said, well, why can't we have Wi-Fi in Mariana for everyone? Why can't we have our own radio system? And we realized that all we had to do was listen to the people in front of us, the people on the ground. They knew, they were the experts in what they needed. So when people started coming to grab a meal with the hands raw, purplish, from hand washing clothes in the river, we realized we need to build a solar laundromat. And we did. And then we realized we need a microgrid, a solar microgrid. And we got a solar microgrid. And filters. And an emergency plan. Pretty soon we were building a model of what a community needs to have to be healthy enough and organized enough in order to be able to face a natural disaster. And our vision now is to be able to share markers of how we know if communities are ready to be able to respond to extreme weather conditions. Because it is communities like mine, these so-called marginalized communities, they have had to create alternative systems of survival because they have had a systemic lack of basic human rights services. But if well invested in and well organized, these communities are better suited to respond when disasters happen. And we owe it to millions of communities like ours around the world to share these lessons and help them prepare for disasters. We owe it to the future generations that will face a disproportionate burden of climate change. We owe it to the ancestors and the activists and leaders that have gotten us this far, and we owe it to the over 3,000 Puerto Ricans who died unnecessarily after Hurricane Maria. I watched as generations upon generations of false narrative collapsed before my eyes. Puerto Rico is doomed was a story. And the one that emerged was being lived by the activists and the organizers and the community leaders on the ground that are working to this day, right now, in the front lines, whether or not they can pay their bills. It turns out communities in Puerto Rico are powerful beyond measure. They may not make the headlines, but they are generous, they're collaborative, we're gonna come up with some of the most important innovations and solutions for human adaptation because our lives depend on it. And we know why people died. It was not a natural disaster. It was a political and a man-made one, and therefore it can be solved. How many Puerto Ricans would have survived had they lived in self-organized communities like Mariana? We will never know. But the truth is that communities are the most important force that will support humanity to face great storms, literally and metaphorically. The future will be challenging all around us. The sea levels will rise, people will be displaced, and they will become more and more isolated and suffer from more and more mental health issues. And the states will likely fail to protect their people the way the US and Puerto Rico governments disappointed us. But communities will rise. They will rise because they were always standing. They were tending to the root. They were teaching the history erased from books. They were doing the most radical thing, especially in a colony. They were building from a place of dignity, of abundance, and self-love. And people like me, who were too jaded and too busy thinking about power, we just weren't looking. Thank you.